Hi, and welcome to Skills Assessment Australia's presentation on the Assessment Tool Generator, or ATG. This webinar is focused on trainers and how you can use the ATG as a very effective learning aid when you're delivering unit TAE ASS502 Design and Develop assessment tools. Now, here is the opening web page, and I assume you have already logged in. If you haven't logged in, if you go to the ATG website and you haven't got an account yet, what you can do is down in the RTO and Trainer section, we've got a link here. Press that inquiry, send us an inquiry, and let us know that you're a TAE trainer, and we'll set you up with a free account. And that's a free working account. So once you've got your account set up and you're ready, let's log in, and then we click on the training button. And that brings us on to the first of 3 screens that we'll be using to demonstrate the creation of assessment tools. Now, in this page, what we're doing is we're specifying the unit of competence that the tool that we design will be based on. Now, there's only one restriction in the units of competency, and that is you can only use a unit that's in the new unit format. So as we say over here on the left, using unit BSB CMM 401 is fine, but using BSB CMM 401A, A for alpha, that would not be fine, right? Because of course every unit that's got a letter suffix is in the old unit format, and we only deal with new unit formats here. So let's have a look over at the control here. Now you click in here and you enter any unit of competency. Now for your students, we've provided a link here to the FSK units. Now the reason we've done that is because generally speaking the foundation skills training package offer you around about 100 units that are very simple, they're not complicated, so TAE ASS502 students will find them very easy to use. So let's go back and we'll choose one. So let's choose FSK DIG 001. Now you'll notice that the training package from which it resides is automatically populated, as well as the release number. Now you can override these. The reason why we have the training package is Training Gov.au doesn't always follow its own rules as far as the way it structures content unit coding relating to training packages. So if you need to override the training package field, you can, or the release number. If there's a second release, you can override that with as needed. But let's choose the default, and we click on Load New Units. Now we've got some introduction here which describes to the student exactly what they need to do and how the various tools and controls on the page operate. The key thing here, I guess, is the compliance matrix. All right, so what we've got here is we've got the 5 assessment methods or instruments that you would be familiar with, as well as 2 additional ones. So we've got the questioning, observation, portfolio, production, and third-party certification. Now, the other 2 columns that we have here are for the situation where the ATG has extracted an assessment item, right, and populated the compliance matrix, but it doesn't necessarily have to be assessed within an instrument. So, for example, you'll notice that the ATG automatically assigns a noted-in plan for the assessment conditions. Okay, so it's asserted some ID. These can all be overwritten if they needed, but this is just a nice, easy way for traceability. Once we create the instruments, we'll be able to trace it back to the unique ID. So they're not set in stone. Nothing here is non-configurable. So if you're unhappy with the default selection, such as noted in plan for the assessment conditions, then you can override that. The only implication of noted in plan is that you'll see that there is a field down here, noted from the compliance matrix. So wherever you've selected a noted in plan in your compliance matrix, Then when you click on Update Notes, it'll transfer from your compliance matrix those items that your students are going to have to comment on. So typically things like the qualifications of assessors, you'd make a note in here about how your internal processes, your assessment processes, ensure that trainers have the requisite qualifications in order to train and assess this unit. So let's go back to our compliance matrix. Now, I will not create assessment instruments that are logically related to the content. I just want to show you what happens once you make your selections, and we'll choose every tool here. And this last unit, this last selection method, inherent in unit, this is used primarily when you've got something such as a foundation skill, which doesn't need to be explicitly assessed, which is the case in this particular situation. So here it says that the foundation skill, that's essential performance, is explicit within the performance criterion of this unit. Well, obviously, we're going to be assessing the performance criterion. You don't need anything to specifically assess that item, so you would just put it as inherent in unit. So we'll continue. We'll put a few different assessment methods into our table here, and I'll leave one blank. Now, we have a rather nice tool which reviews the compliance matrix that you've just created for common errors and warnings. Now, the definitions of all the errors and warnings are up here in the instructions. But if you have a look, you'll see that things are highlighted either in yellow if it's a warning or red if it's an error. Now, nothing here prevents you from generating the instruments even if there are errors and warnings. It's really up to you to decide whether you agree that the issue that's being raised needs to be addressed or whether it can be ignored. Now let's have a look at what's raised here. W2, warning 2, accessible item is assessed by more than one instrument. And a one-to-one mapping often indicates that there's a problem. So basically we're saying that we've got a foundation skill and we've assigned a production method and inherent in unit. Yeah, it doesn't make much sense, so we'd probably get rid of that. Here we've got an error as indicated by the red background, and it's saying that an accessible item has not been assigned an assessment method. Indeed, all of the items within that row are blank. So we'll assign a unit. So it checks against about a dozen common errors and warnings when you press that review button. Now, the remainder of the assessment plan does not need to be completed in order to generate the instruments. It's up to you as to whether you go through this in detail, but let's quickly go through these fields. Target group summary, and we give the students plenty of guidance as to the kind of information they want, and we've provided a sample text here as well. And that, of course, is completely configurable. That would be edited by the student to reflect who they're going to design this assessment instrument for. Excuse me, the assessment tool for. The purpose and context, again, sample text, that would be customized by the student to reflect the particulars of their assessment context. Notes from the compliance matrix we've already talked about. The nice thing is once you've finished assigning your methods in the compliance matrix, pressing this button will automatically populate this field with all of those items, for which the student will then comment how each of those assessment conditions are being addressed by the process, but not necessarily the instruments. Assessment methods and instruments talks about how and when they're going to be applied, and we've given, again, some sample text to guide the student as to what's needed. Any industry or workplace standards that need to be addressed as well. Reasonable adjustments and contextualization guidelines. Now, for that, we've also provided a link to the unit for the student. So if they wanted to find the contextualization guideline, they would go to the unit and they would look at the companion volumes. Go into these companion volumes and identify any contextualization guidelines that have been provided by the training package author. Let's go back. RPL, for those who have a testament already and those who have the skills but not a testament, the student needs to describe, of course, how these aspects of RPL would be covered in the assessment process. Assessor resources. Again, we've got a handy tool that will automatically populate this field with all of the instruments that they've selected. Okay, so if they only selected in the compliance matrix ticks under the questioning and observation methods, then only those two items would appear when you transfer it into this field. Candidate resources, exactly the same control available for the candidate resources, and the student would have to populate it with any other resources that are needed by the students. For location, multiple choices can be made here. Any issues regarding the timing or the sequence with which those tools have to be applied. How they're going to approve this training plan once it's done. And then we've got two controls, review and save. Now we'll press save now. And what that means is that all of the content that we've just created is being saved in the database, and that'll be downloaded into the assessment plan subsequently once we've created the instruments. Okay, so there we are. Let's go to the third and final page of the ATG, which is to generate the instruments. And again, we've got some nice guidance as to what all the controls mean. Basically, it's fully configurable. Students are able to combine fields. Matter of, if we wanted to combine these two cells, for example, we can create a new row underneath it and paste that requirement here, or we might want to add it into this field. So it's fully configurable. We can also delete those rows that we created, and we can move an item up or down. So if you wanted this first item to appear underneath PE2, we'd simply click the down button and it moves it. And then we give plenty of guidance. So in this case, we're looking at the observation instrument. The student would reorder and or merge any requirements into the positions they need to be, and they would then rephrase the assessment item from the unit into a suitable terminology. So they might add, did the candidate use digital technology? Obviously that needs to be made smart, specific, measurable in particular. So they might change digital technology into the use of a photocopier to complete at least 3 short and basic workplace tasks consisting of, and you would have to list them. So that's the basis for the observation instruments. Once they've changed the terminology, so they've turned the sense of that sentence into a checklist type sentence, and they've made anything that's not specific and measurable and tightened up the terms, then what they would do is say transfer tasks. And they would create, what we're suggesting is they create the instructions to the candidate that basically envelop those observation tasks. Obviously, if you're going to assess the student on 2 specific tasks, in the candidate instructions, you need to explain what those tasks are and create that assessment scenario around those 2 tasks. So it's a nice way of making sure that the content within the checklist is addressed by the instructions to the candidate. We have a field for the instructions for the assessor, and we've got some sample instructions. Indeed, for all of the instruments, we have sample text, which your student would then customize to the particular context of their assessment task, and evidence requirements. And that's all it is to create the observation instrument. Now, all of the tools are in a similar manner to this. The observation, portfolio, and the production methods are very similar. The questioning instrument is a little bit different in that certainly they still have to rephrase the question. So remember, this is purely transferred from the unit of competence. They have to change the structure of that sentence to make it a proper question, but they have to offer obviously their model answer or their assessment guideline for each of those items. Again, they can move items down, they can add a new field if they wanted to break a field into several subcomponents, or they can then delete the row. Instructions to candidates. instructions to assessor and evidence requirements. That's exactly what we saw before. And we've got the portfolio of documents with the same structure as what we saw before in the observation. Production of an item, again, exactly the same. And then the last section is the third-party report. And that, of course, is slightly different because of its nature, obviously. And the student would customize and contextualize these unit assessment items to follow to the correct sense for requesting whether or not the candidate did this from the third-party assessor. Now, at the moment, you can see download report is blank. What we need to do is save what we've just done. Now, a really cool feature here is that if there's something you don't like in the way items are now being appearing in each of these instruments, what we can do is go back to the plan and we can make edits to the plan. So for example, if you decided to change the location of where something's being assessed, you can make that change now. However, what that means is when you press the Generate Tools button, it's going to rewrite anything that you may have previously saved. So you want to make sure that compliance matrix is done nicely. However, if you don't change the compliance matrix and you're only making changes to some of these other fields here, then what you can do is you can untick this box, press save, we'll go back down to the end, oh, and it's just populating still. Okay, and now we'll untick that button, generate the instruments, and what it's done is it's gone back to the field that you created before, but it hasn't overridden it. Okay, so it's a nice way of going back between the plan and the instruments if you need to, without having all of the work that you've done overwritten. Okay, so we're going to save this now, and now we're going to generate the download the reports. Now you can see there are two buttons available here. That's only because I've assigned myself both an unlimited license and a student license. For you guys and your students, you'll only have download PDF available. This is available only to the people who own the full or unlimited license. And we click on download PDF and we'll open it with Adobe Acrobat. Okay, and now we have a PDF of the assessment plan that we created. It's got a compliance matrix already loaded. And you'll note that we have a watermark diagonally across the page here. So created by Carl at www.saa.edu.au. Now that's for a couple of purposes. Obviously we don't want students cheating, but also it makes sure that the authenticity of the submitted work, make sure that the student has indeed created the tool that they're submitting. You'll note that a student license holder is unable to go in and change their name. So basically whatever name they've enrolled and paid with, that's the name that's locked into the system. So it'll always identify the users on their plans. And here we have the observation instrument and the questioning instrument and so on. And that's how one generates an assessment plan and an assessment instruments using the assessment tool generator. I hope you found this webinar useful.